The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have reviewed the legal issues in this case, and therefore I will not grant a 30-day stay. May God bless Karla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
On the morning of Monday, June 13th, 1983, the Houston Police Department responded to an apartment in northeastern Houston, Texas, after receiving a frantic phone call from Gregory Scott Traver. Inside, they discovered the bodies of a man and a woman. They'd been savagely attacked and killed by someone using a pickaxe. Investigators were puzzled by the sheer violence of the attack, as they initially believed it was a robbery gone wrong. However, a look into the backgrounds of the victims revealed interesting details that changed the course of the case. As the investigation deepened, leads pointed towards someone who had an intense grudge against one of the victims, and her name was Karla Faye Tucker. Who was Karla Faye Tucker? And what was her role in the double murder? Hello, and welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from around the world. Today, we dive into the twisted and disturbing case of Karla Faye Tucker. With a population of over 2.3 million, Houston, Texas is not only the most populous city, but is also the seat of Harris County. It's considered the most diverse city in the United States and is home to people from multiple cultural and religious backgrounds. However, Houston is more famous for another reason, being home to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's NASA Johnson Space Center Mission Control and Operational Facility. But with a big city comes an increase in crime, and Houston is ranked among the top 100 most dangerous cities in the United States. In 1983, Houston was rocked by a gruesome double murder. Gregory Scott Traver was waiting to be picked up for work by his friend, 27-year-old Jerry Lynn Dean, on Monday morning, June 13, 1983. However, Jerry never arrived. The two of them had been contracted to install an alarm system that day. Gregory knew Jerry was not someone who skipped out on work without a good reason. The two men lived near each other, so Gregory decided to walk over to Jerry's, assuming his friend may have overslept. When he arrived at Jerry's apartment, he found the door slightly ajar. He pushed the door open and called out for Jerry. There was no answer. Gregory then noticed that the TV and stereo were stacked together and the Harley-Davidson that Jerry had been working on was missing. He began checking each room as he called for Jerry, but there was no answer. Gregory eventually opened the door to the spare bedroom. He was not prepared for what he was about to discover. Inside, he found his friend Jerry on the floor next to the bed. Jerry's body lay in a pool of blood. On the bed was a woman he didn't recognize with a pickaxe jutting out of her chest. Shocked by the scene before him, Gregory ran out of the apartment and back to his house. He called the Houston police immediately to report what he found in Jerry's apartment. When police arrived, they took notice of the chaotic scene before them. Tools, motorcycle parts, and dirty clothes littered the floor. In the spare bedroom was the body of Jerry and an unknown female companion. The scene was gruesome and showed the violent manner in which both victims were killed. It was obvious to officers that the murder weapon was the pickaxe. One of the officers removed the axe from the victim's chest and filed it away as evidence. Both bodies were removed and transported to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office for autopsies. Investigators questioned Gregory about what he found when he came to Jerry's apartment. He told them that the door had been left open and the apartment appeared to have been ransacked. Gregory also told investigators that Jerry's Harley-Davidson and blue Chevrolet El Camino pickup truck were missing. A search of the apartment revealed that both victims' wallets were also missing and that a ball-peen hammer from Jerry's own toolbox was also used during the attack. It seemed obvious to investigators that the murders were a result of a robbery gone wrong. They noted that there was no forced entry into the apartment. Neighbors were questioned, and many told the investigators that they heard loud noises coming from the apartment in the early hours of the morning. Many said that they didn't call the police because they hadn't heard any screaming or gunshots and assumed nothing violent had happened. Investigators surmised that whomever attacked and killed Jerry and his female companion were either led into the apartment by the victims or the door was left unlocked. However, the viciousness of the murders didn't sit well with investigators. It had looked like an intentional attack, given the shocking savagery of the crime. The autopsy reports revealed that Jerry had been stabbed 20 times with a pickaxe. He also suffered a blunt force injury to the back of the skull. The woman had been stabbed 15 times, with the final blow directly into her heart. Through fingerprints taken during the autopsy, they were able to identify the woman as 32-year-old Deborah Ruth Thornton.
I come in from my job 5 o'clock in the evening after a hard day's work, and I get in and my phone rings, and the first thing I know, guy's on the phone saying, my dad's on the phone saying, hey, you need to come over to the shop. I'm like, what's up? He says, your sister's been murdered. I'm like, no, Sure enough, she was. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe they'd kill my sister.
Now that investigators had the names of their victims, they needed to take a closer look at their backgrounds. From what investigators had seen at the crime scene, they knew that the murders bordered on overkill. They didn't believe that the robbers were just random criminals. The murders felt too personal to ignore. Investigators started by questioning people close to Jerry. They learned that Jerry met Deborah just the night before at a pool party. Other than that fateful meeting, neither victim knew each other personally. Jerry's friends who attended the party on Sunday evening told investigators that they found out that Deborah had come to the party to blow off some steam. Investigators also learned that Deborah was married with 2 children. Naturally, their first suspect was Deborah's husband, Richard Thornton. Richard told investigators that he was at home with his and Deborah's children on the evening of Sunday, June 12, 1983. He confessed to having an argument with Deborah that Sunday and told investigators that he asked her to leave the house and not return that night. Richard explained that he and Deborah had been experiencing marital issues for some time. However, he told them that he loved his wife and would not hurt her in any way. Richard told investigators that he wasn't aware that Deborah was cheating on him, and it was the first time he'd heard about Jerry. Investigators eliminated Richard as a suspect after his alibi checked out, but they were made aware of another of Deborah's family members who could possibly hold a grudge, her father, William List. Investigators looked into William's background. They discovered that he was once convicted of assaulting young boys and had served out his sentence. He was now a wealthy business owner in Texas, but he was under investigation for tax evasion. A further check of the case revealed that Deborah had been subpoenaed to testify against William. Investigators believed that William may have had a good enough reason to silence Deborah. William was questioned regarding the double murder, but denied having any involvement. Investigators continued to look into William as the weeks went by, but they never found any solid evidence that could link him to the double murder. Meanwhile, another team of investigators were digging into Jerry's past as well. They soon discovered that Jerry also had his fair share of bad blood. Jerry Lindeen was a well-known mechanic around Houston. As investigators questioned people that knew Jerry and tried to uncover information about his life, one name started to pop up very often: Karla Faye Tucker. 23-year-old Karla was a well-known party girl and the best friend of Jerry's ex-wife, Shawn Dean. Investigators questioned Jerry's friends further and discovered that Karla and Jerry had a volatile relationship from the outset. Their feud had begun a year earlier when Karla's roommate and best friend, Shawn, met Jerry Dean. Karla and Jerry's relationship could be described as oil and water. Karla's first impression of Jerry was that he was weak and didn't suit Shawn's personality. But the tension between them grew worse when Karla found Jerry's Harley-Davidson parked in the middle of her apartment living room. Oil had leaked onto the carpet from the bike, and that night, Karla chased Jerry out of the apartment in a rage. Over the next few months, the animosity between Karla and Jerry grew even more intense. When Karla and Shawn decided to go on a road trip following their favorite bands, Jerry became jealous. He found a photo album of Shawn and Karla's and started stabbing every picture of Karla he could find, including the only picture she had of herself and her mother. Karla was infuriated and swore that she was going to teach Jerry a lesson. She tried hard to get Shawn to end the relationship with Jerry, but instead, the couple moved in together. Shawn and Jerry had got married in February 1983, but Karla was still convinced that Jerry was all wrong for Sean. A month after their wedding, Sean had stopped by Karla's new house to pick up her jacket. Although the two women remained friends, Karla told Sean she never wanted to see Jerry again. When Karla heard that Jerry was parked outside, she flew into a rage and stormed out of the house. Karla allegedly punched Jerry in the face and broke his glasses. Jerry had to be taken to the hospital to have pieces of glass removed from his eye. Investigators discovered that Sean and Jerry divorced in June 1983 due to allegations of abuse and lifestyle differences. In an act of revenge for the alleged physical abuse she endured at Jerry's hands, Sean had stolen Jerry's bank card and withdrew his entire savings of $460 from his account. The two women went on a shopping spree, but Jerry was allegedly plotting his own revenge. Rumors began to spread that Jerry had hired a man for $300 to shoot Karla in the face with a flare gun. Jerry's plan was to disfigure Karla for life, and when she heard about it, she was furious. The volatile relationship between Karla and Jerry piqued the interest of investigators, and they were curious to know more about these notorious party girls. Karla Faye Tucker was born on November 18, 1959, to Larry and Carolyn Tucker. Her life, however, was tumultuous from the very beginning. Her sisters Kathy and Carrie, who were much older, influenced her into smoking at the age of 8. To make matters worse, Karla's parents divorced when she was 10 years old. It was at this time she learned that she was not Larry Tucker's daughter, but rather the child of one of her mother's extramarital affairs. By the age of 12, Karla had already started experimenting with drugs and having intimate relations with men. Karla eventually dropped out of school at age 14 and followed her mother and sisters into prostitution. Her mother, Carolyn, taught Karla how to use her body to earn herself some money. It was around this period in her life that her sisters started meeting men who were involved with biker clubs. One of these bikers introduced Karla to the numbing pleasures of heroin. Both mother and daughter often traveled with rock bands such as the Allman Brothers Band, the Marshall Tucker Band, and the Eagles as groupies. Karla became addicted to this new unrestricted lifestyle. When she was 16 years old, Karla met a handyman named Stephen Griffith. The two would go on to marry, but domestic life was tiresome for Karla, and they were constantly arguing and having intense physical altercations. Stephen had told his friends that Karla could hit harder than any man he knew. After 2 years, the couple called it quits, and Karla returned to living life on the edge. Her mother, Carolyn, died when Karla was 20 years old. By this time, Karla had once again started hanging around with biker clubs. It was during her period of grief she became friends with Sean. The two grew close, but Karla became jealous when Sean started dating Jerry Dean. Karla would eventually meet a man named Danny Garrett, who was 35 years old, a local bartender and friends with Sean and Jerry. The four often partied together and engaged in a very risky lifestyle. Karla and Jerry, though, could never seem to get along. Having done their research on Karla, investigators called her in for an interview. During questioning, Karla didn't deny that she and Jerry had been at odds with each other. However, she denied any involvement in the murders of Jerry and Deborah and remained unaffected and cool. Karla agreed to have her fingerprints taken. She also agreed to take a polygraph test, but later changed her mind after her boyfriend Danny told her she shouldn't. Karla's prints weren't helpful, as investigators could never find any usable prints from the crime scene or murder weapon. They were suspicious of Karla and Danny after her sudden withdrawal from the polygraph test, but it wasn't enough to label them as suspects. Investigators, though, continued to pay Karla and Danny regular visits to see if either of them would slip and reveal something incriminating. However, Karla was completely at ease and continued to enjoy her life of partying. Weeks would pass, and investigators were still no closer to finding any hard evidence against Danny and Karla. It was then that a homicide detective named J.C. Mosier took an interest in the case. He hadn't been assigned to the case, but upon hearing Danny Garrett's name, he grew curious. Mosier had grown up in the same neighborhood as Danny and his family. Mosier was also good friends with Danny's ex-wife. Mosier called Danny's ex-wife and asked her if she'd heard anything about Danny's involvement with Karla and the Houston pickaxe double murder. She told Mosier that she hadn't, but would ask around. Mosier's curiosity would pay off. The police department was about to receive their biggest lead in the shocking case.
It was really unbelievable. It was I'd never seen anything that terrible, and I worked at Homicide Division about 7-8 years and saw a lot of evil things being done, but never anything quite like this.
On July 18, 1983, the Houston Police Department received an emergency call. The man on the other end of the line sounded nervous and demanded to speak to Mosier only. When Mosier took the call, he recognized the voice. It was Doug Garrett, Danny Garrett's brother. Doug had information about the pickaxe murder. Mosier listened as Doug revealed two names that had become familiar in the police department, Danny Garrett and Karla Faye Tucker. Mosier knew they had to act fast. Doug told him that he'd been keeping the secret for the last 5 weeks. He also mentioned a third person named James Liebrandt, a friend who went with the couple to Jerry's house the night of the murders. Doug told Mosier the situation was beginning to get out of hand because Karla was now talking about killing someone else to cover up the crime. He agreed to meet with investigators at the station and even told them he had another person who could back up his story, Carrie Burrell, Karla's sister. Doug and Carrie made their way to the police station. They were interviewed separately. In the interview with investigators, Doug told them that Karla's hatred of Jerry was no secret among their friend group. He went on to explain that at 6:30 a.m. on Monday, June 13, 1983, Danny and Karla showed up at his house with a blue El Camino pickup truck. It was then that Karla started boasting about killing Jerry and some unknown woman. Danny backed up her story. Doug was reluctant to help them, but eventually he caved. He burned Jerry's wallet in an ashtray and dumped the stolen motorcycle parts in a nearby ditch. In the other interview room, Carrie told investigators that she'd moved in with Doug about 2 weeks after the murder. She explained that she'd grown terrified of Karla after the murders and needed to escape. She also went on to tell investigators that Karla had begun making plans to kill Carrie's ex-husband, Ronnie Burrell. Carrie said that Karla and Danny's newfound taste for blood made them want to eliminate Ronnie because he was someone who knew about the double murder. After 2 hours of speaking, Doug agreed to show investigators where he dumped the motorcycle parts. It was then that Mosier asked Doug to help them catch Karla and Danny confessing to the murder. Initially, Doug was nervous, but he agreed after realizing the nightmares he was having wouldn't end until justice was done. Investigators were ready to put their plan into motion, but they weren't prepared for what they were about to hear from the mouths of the suspected murderers. On the afternoon of July 20th, 1983, a transmitter was taped to Doug's chest and a recorder was placed in his boot. Doug got on his motorcycle and rode to Karla's house, ready to get their confession on tape. A block away from Karla's house, Mosier and several investigators were parked and waiting in a van, listening in on the conversation. Doug sat down and made some small talk before steering the conversation toward the murder. Karla and Danny painted a vivid picture of what happened that fateful night. On June 11, 1983, Karla threw a birthday party for her sister Carrie. The party continued the entire weekend with friends coming and going, alcohol and drugs flowed freely, and there was generally raucous behavior. Karla told Doug that she was becoming increasingly hyper and strung out. She and Danny went on to explain that on Sunday evening, they, along with their friend James, were the last 3 people who were awake. It was then that Karla had the idea of stealing Jerry Dean's prized Harley-Davidson and selling off the parts to make some extra cash. Karla mentioned her intense hatred for Jerry and how she had wanted to make him pay for everything he'd done to her and Sean. At around 3 a.m. on Monday morning, June 13, 1983, Karla, Danny, and James made their way to Jerry's apartment. They were able to enter the apartment because Karla had stolen Sean's set of house keys weeks earlier. Karla said at the time she didn't know when she'd need them, but they'd come in handy that night. It was then that Doug asked them if it was their intention to kill anyone that night, and both Karla and Danny said it was something that just happened. Karla explained that she didn't know what she was doing or thinking. She just wanted to hurt Jerry. At first, they went looking for things to steal. Karla and Danny then opened the spare bedroom door and found Jerry asleep. Karla sat on Jerry and tried to pin him down. When Jerry woke up and grabbed her by the arms to move her off, Danny picked up Jerry's ball-peen hammer and hit him behind the head. In her drugged state, Karla started to grow annoyed with the gurgling sounds that Jerry was making and wanted it to stop. It was then that she grabbed the pickaxe and started swinging the tool into Jerry's body. Karla admitted to becoming aroused by the action of stabbing Jerry. Danny then delivered the final blow to Jerry that killed him. Danny left the room and Karla slowly calmed down from her drug-fueled rage. She then saw a woman in Jerry's bed. Karla had been so focused on Jerry, she didn't notice another person in bed. She and the woman struggled until Danny came back into the room. Once again, in a rage, she kept hitting the woman with the pickaxe and finally stabbed her in the heart. That was all the investigators needed to make their move. As Doug left Karla's house, investigators were ready and waiting. Danny was arrested and taken into custody just a block away from the house by Mosier as he was driving to work. At the same time, armed officers entered Karla's house, which erupted into chaos. Karla, along with James Leibrand, who happened to be visiting that day, was also arrested and taken into custody. All the friends present at Karla's house were rounded up by police officers and taken in for questioning. At the police station, the friends who were taken in for questioning told officers everything they knew. All their stories were identical, and each of them explained that Karla always hated Jerry. The only two that kept silent throughout questioning were Karla and Danny. All Karla told investigators is that she was so high on drugs she couldn't remember anything about the night of the murders. Karla and Danny were arrested and charged on the evening of July 20th, 1983 with capital murder for the killing of Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton. They were both detained at the Harris County Jail without bail. In September 1983, Karla and Danny were tried separately for the murders of Jerry and Deborah. Karla was charged with both the murders, but after testifying at Danny's hearing, the charge for the murder of Deborah was dropped. Danny, too, was only charged for Jerry's murder. Karla entered a plea of not guilty and remained behind bars awaiting trial. Prison officials said that Karla remained outspoken and brash while in custody. She didn't seem to care about anything or anyone. That was all about to change after she found religion. While awaiting trial, Karla had started to sober up from her years of alcohol and drug consumption. As her mind started to clear, she began reading books from the jail library. It was then that she picked up a copy of the Bible for the first time. Karla reportedly told officials, fellow prisoners, and ministry officials that it was the first time she started to understand the consequences of her actions. While in prison, she began attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Through these regular sessions, she met others who had destroyed their lives by abusing alcohol and drugs. Inspired by their stories, Karla began her own Bible studies group and made a decision to better herself through understanding.
As you said, there's a freedom in it. When I was forgiven and I experienced that forgiveness, it freed me up inside to soar. It freed me up inside to go higher and to go deeper with the Lord. But when we're holding unforgiveness, we're blocking communication and intimacy with the Lord in our own lives, and bitterness can start to take root in us. Well, when God forgave me, I think he used that forgiveness and that love to reach down inside of me and take every root of evil, every root of horror that was in me, and literally pull it up and get rid of it and go back in me and fill up with his love.
But her newfound identity was not enough to save her, and justice still needed to be served. In April 1984, Karla went on trial for the murder of Jerry Dean. She pleaded not guilty, but promised that she would tell everyone the truth. Karla admitted to being under the heavy influence of drugs and alcohol at the time of the murders. Her defense team too used that angle and told the court that it was not a premeditated murder, but a sudden explosion of anger during the robbery fueled by substances that led to the killings. Some of the witnesses brought in by the prosecution also supported this idea. They believed that Karla and Danny didn't know right from wrong at the time of the murders. The jury deliberated for an hour before coming to the decision that Karla was guilty on all charges. She was given a chance to testify on her own behalf before the judge made a final decision. Karla spoke for nearly 5 hours and told the court of the life she once led. She then explained that it was while in prison she began to understand every action she had taken clearly. Despite the impassioned speech, Karla was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Karla became the only woman on death row in Texas. She went on to testify at Danny Garrett's trial in November 1984. During her testimony, she told the court that she hoped he wouldn't be convicted. However, these hopes were dashed as Danny was also sentenced to death by lethal injection. It was the last time Karla and Danny ever saw each other. He was taken to a detention facility just outside of Huntsville, Texas, while Karla spent her remaining days in Gatesville Prison, Texas. Between 1984 and 1992, retrials and appeals made on behalf of Karla were denied, but Karla had, over the years, gained a following of supporters. The legal system may have recognized her as a murderer, but to many people, she was the icon of reform. Initially, she'd accepted her fate to die by lethal injection, but following the death of Danny Garrett in 1993 due to liver disease, Karla decided to fight her case and held on to the hope. She'd also found love and married prison chaplain Dana Lane Brown in 1995. She made an appeal on June 22, 1997 for her death to be commuted to life in prison. Those that supported her included Pope John Paul II, Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi, Speaker of the House of U.S. Representatives Newt Gingrich, and televangelist Pat Robertson. In a surprising turn of events, Ronald Carlson, Deborah's brother, and Peggy Kurtz, Jerry's sister, also spoke out on behalf of Karla's sentence being commuted after seeing the transformation she'd undergone while in prison. Even the warden of Texas Huntsville Prison testified that Karla was a model inmate.
The fate of Karla Faye Tucker now rests in the hands of the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. It's up to them to recommend whether her death sentence should be reduced to life in prison. But it's up to Governor George W. Bush to decide if it will be.
On January 28, 1998, the Texas Prison Board of Pardons and Paroles turned down her request. Karla wrote a letter to Texas Governor George W. Bush appealing her case and admitting that what she'd done was an act of utter cruelty. Hours before her execution, Governor Bush refused the final 11th hour appeal to block her execution. On February 2, 1998, Karla requested a peach, a banana, and a garden salad with ranch dressing as her last meal. News channels documented her final hours.
Karla Faye Tucker's apparent last day began at 6 behind the walls of this unit of the Texas State Prison System. Continuing her fast, the 39-year-old convicted murderer declined breakfast and has been refusing to eat.
I don't know what's going to happen either way, but I have to surrender that to the Lord.
Prison officials say she met with family from 8 until about noon. They hope to make her final hours as calm as possible, but say this will not be an easy day for anyone.
That's a traumatic situation for everybody involved, not only for the inmate, but also the inmates' families, for our correctional officers, and we try to keep...
There appears to be little chance the courts will stop the execution, but there are demonstrators here asking the sentence be commuted to life in prison.
We hope that Governor Bush will decide to show mercy in this case.
Tucker was convicted of killing Jerry Lynn Dean with a pickaxe and has also admitted killing Deborah Thornton as well. Thornton's husband says people should not feel any compassion for Tucker.
The same person who looks out from that television set, she's the same person who looked straight at my wife and threw a pickaxe into her body.
I'm not afraid of dying.
Tucker is a born-again Christian, and while she says she's not afraid of dying, her attorneys continue to fight for her life in both state and federal courts.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just handed down a decision. It has turned down Karla Faye Tucker's request for a stay of execution. That decision was just handed down by the Supreme Court. That means the state of Texas will move ahead with Karla Faye Tucker's execution. That is scheduled for later on this evening. Karla Faye Tucker still has one chance left. She is waiting to hear now from Governor Bush. He has said that he would not make a decision about a one-time 30-day reprieve until he heard from the Supreme Court. He has just heard from the Supreme Court. Again, that decision was to turn down Karla Faye Tucker's request for a stay of execution.
On February 3, 1998, Karla was led to the execution chamber. She requested that her sister Carrie, husband Dana, and friends Jackie Onken and Ronald Carlson be present at her execution. Karla was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m., 8 minutes after receiving the injection. Karla was the first woman executed in Texas in 135 years since the reinstatement of capital punishment. Many spoke out after the execution.
It is a tear in the fabric of society when a murder happens. The death penalty is the thread and needle to sew it back together again.
Tucker, in 1983, was convicted of killing Jerry Lynn Dean with a pickaxe and admitted killing Thornton's wife, Deborah. Tucker found God and turned her life around, apparently, enough for forgiveness from Texas Governor George W. Bush, but not a reprieve.
The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have reviewed the legal issues in this case, and therefore I will not grant a 30-day stay. May God bless Karla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
The governor okayed the execution after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected 2 last-minute appeals. It, along with Texas's state courts and parole board, denied her clemency.
We feel like the system and the process has got to be changed. And that's no greater evidence than with Karla.
In the end, the sentence was carried out with a sense of loss imposed upon the Tucker family and peace for the Thorntons.
As she was dying, I did ask God to have mercy on her soul. It was the right thing to do. And her dying was also the right thing to do.
She was laid to rest at Forest Park Lawndale Cemetery in Houston. After her execution, accusations were made against Governor Bush and his lack of empathy for Karla during her appeal process. However, Governor Bush would later issue a statement in which he said he had forgiven Karla, but she still needed to face justice for taking the lives of 2 people. Karla became the subject of several movie adaptations that depicted her dysfunctional upbringing and how it eventually led down the path of crime. Years later, the captain of the Death House team, Richard Allen, would tell Werner Herzog that Karla's execution led him to have an emotional breakdown. Allen resigned from his position in the Texas prison system and changed his position of being pro-capital punishment and the death penalty. He went on to tell Herzog that no one had the right to take another life, even if it was the law.
When they brought in Karla Faye, I stayed back there with her. Now, definitely that was the first female that we were fixing to execute. I remember one thing so vividly, that it was an hour before, and I was standing there, and the chaplain was standing there, and she looked at me and she goes, "Thank you, Captain Allen, for everything you've done." I said, "You're welcome." You know, that's all I could say. And what else am I going to say? I'm fixing to strap you down in another hour. Which we went, procedure and everything went just the way it was supposed to, you know. She was pronounced dead. I went back in there and I took the straps off, put her, you know, on the gurney, and let's go. We locked everything up and went about our business, and everything was fine. I had a little shop in the back, and it was 6 o'clock, and the news come on over the radio and started again. And for some reason, just out of the blue, hearing it triggered me seeing her, and I started shaking. Oh, what's wrong? And then
how badly did you shake?
It was a shake. It was a shake like I couldn't. Why am I shaking? And then I could see I was sweating, and tears. Also, and this is hurting.
For his part in the crime, James Liebrandt was charged with accessory to murder and testified against Karla and Danny. However, there's never been more information about his sentencing or whereabouts since the murder occurred. The murders of Jerry Dean and Deborah Tucker were indeed senseless and horrific. However, Karla's reformation has changed the opinions of many who only saw her as a drug-addicted murderer. Her execution divided many who fought against their own moral obligations.